Drive west out of Albuquerque, and the city just gives up. The subdivisions with their hopeful names, Desert Springflower, Paradise Hills, thin out into sand and tumbleweed. There's a shooting range out here, a speedway, a county jail, and since 2009, a patch of empty land that New Mexico will never quite forget. That February, a woman walking her dog on the mesa noticed a bone poking out of the dirt. She thought it was a dog's. It wasn't. Over the following weeks, police dug up 11 bodies scattered across 92 acres, owned by a home developer who'd been planning to build there. It took almost a year to put names to all of them. Every victim was a woman. The youngest was 15. The oldest was 32. Most were Hispanic. All of them had gone missing years before anyone found them, sometime between 2001 and 2005, which meant that whoever put them there had been walking around free for the better part of a decade by the time the first bone surfaced. 10 of the 11 had histories of prostitution and drug use. Police mentioned this a lot, maybe too much. One of them, 22-year-old Michelle Valdez, was 4 months pregnant when she died. The last body identified belonged to Jamie Barella, 15 years old, who told her mother she was heading to the park with her cousin and left the house with her curling iron still plugged in. Her cousin was 27-year-old Evelyn Salazar, identified 2 months earlier. The only victim with no ties to New Mexico at all was Celania Edwards, also 15, a runaway from Lawton, Oklahoma, and the only black woman among the 11. For a while, this looked like it might actually get solved. Albuquerque had never had a serial killer before, not one like this, and the department brought in FBI profilers and detectives from across the state. Families were told more than once that finding the man responsible was the top priority. That was 5 years ago. Nobody has been named a suspect, and somewhere along the way, the crime of the century stopped making the local news. Why nobody's looking anymore, there hasn't been the degree of public fear and alarm that you might expect, says Dirk Gibson, a University of New Mexico professor who's written 2 books on serial killers. There's a sense of physical remoteness. This place was very removed. A combination of remoteness of time and geography made it so there has been little pressure on the police to investigate. Part of the problem is that there was almost nothing to investigate. Medical examiners couldn't even determine how the women died. The official cause on all 11 death certificates just says homicidal violence. No witnesses ever came forward. The burial site itself yielded barely any forensic evidence. Whoever did this left the women with nothing connecting them except the ground they were buried in. There have been leads, technically. In late 2010, police released photographs of 7 women they thought might somehow tie into the case. 2 of those women turned out to be alive. One had died of natural causes, unrelated. Nobody in the department has ever explained where the photos came from or what, if anything, came of it. Then there was Ron Irwin, a photographer from Joplin, Missouri, who used to come through for the New Mexico State Fair, held not far from the burial ground. Police seized hundreds of his photos and documents. Nothing tied him to the murders. He later told a local paper the whole thing had wrecked him. A private investigator named George Walker started getting phone calls and emails from someone who claimed to know who the killer was. Taunting, cryptic messages. That lead never went anywhere either. There's a possibility the killer has come and gone, Walker says. Serial killers move. That's why they don't get caught. If he didn't get caught, I'm sure there are more victims somewhere. He could possibly be on the loose in New Mexico or another state. A list nobody read. Here's the detail that still bothers people close to the case. In 2007, 2 years before anyone found a single body on West Mesa, a local reporter discovered that Albuquerque's one and only missing persons detective had already compiled a list. 16 women, all of them working as prostitutes, all vanished between 2001 and 2006. Nobody connected it to anything at the time. It just read like a list of missing hookers in a city where that kind of disappearance barely registers. 9 of those 16 women eventually turned up at West Mesa. The other 7 are still missing, which raises the question nobody in Albuquerque likes to sit with for very long. If this grave existed, is there another one somewhere out on the mesa, still waiting to be found? And is the person who dug it still out there? It's logical that there may be more than one grave site. Gibson says, Albuquerque is filled with tons of these types of sites. If police discovered this one, which clearly had been discontinued, maybe there's another one. I wouldn't be at all surprised. The less dead West Mesa isn't an outlier, as much as it feels like one. Serial killings have dropped off in the U.S. over the past few decades, but the ones that still happen land overwhelmingly on women. FBI data from 2011 puts it at 70% of victims since 1985, mostly women in their 20s and 30s. The majority of victims of serial killers are what I call the less dead, says Stephen Egger, a criminology professor at the University of Houston Clear Lake, who has consulted for the FBI. As far as the public is concerned, they are less alive because they tend to be the marginalized groups in society, in this case, drug addicts and prostitutes. There's an attitude that permeates the press and the public that reduces pressure on police to solve the crime, at least initially, until you've got a number of victims. Albuquerque police still officially call this an open investigation, filed under the clinical name 118th Street Homicides. A department spokeswoman declined to comment for this story, and detectives have said very little publicly in years. The department has had its hands full elsewhere. A Department of Justice civil rights investigation found a pattern of unconstitutional use of deadly force, 20 fatal shootings by officers between 2009 and 2012. Add to that a string of sexual assault accusations against state and local officers, some involving prostitutes, and it starts to look like solving a decade-old murder case involving women the city had already written off was never going to be anyone's priority. Whoever he is, everyone who's spent time on this case has their own theory. Dirty cops, a drug gang, a single man, still out there, still capable. Nobody knows, and at this point, it's starting to feel like nobody's trying that hard to find out. Albuquerqueans don't relate to the victims. They think they're just a bunch of hookers and drug addicts. Gibson says, police budgets are stretched thin. There's so little money, and there are so many crimes. Investigating a 10-year-old crime where the police think that the victims had it coming, there's just no incentive for that. 11 women went into the ground on that mesa. Whoever put them there walked away clean, and as far as anyone can tell, he's never had to look back.